Hello, Bill.
Hello, Sandy. How are you?
I'm fine. Haven't seen you for ages.
It's almost dark out over here. It's very sad.
Well, it's totally dark here. Suck it up. Stop complaining.
Yeah, but it's only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What time does it get dark there now?
Yeah, it's starting to get dark much earlier.
Yeah.
Anyway, this evening, not our usual day to meet, but otherwise we wouldn't see each other for a very long time. So tonight we're going to speak about beauty contest.
Great.
Um, Mainly because I've been thinking a lot about what beauty actually is. And a few months ago, I spoke to Alistair Heron and Philip Tunner, who are both academics about beauty. And they, of course, approached it from a very academic, scholarly or scholastic point of view. And I came at it with that old chestnut, just thinking about it purely in terms of really like physical beauty, like what is physical beauty.
Sure.
But actually, I think it is okay to talk about that, and also okay to say that for the most part, when we talk about physical beauty and the connotation of the word, we usually think about female beauty. And for artists, certainly, the muse, the female muse, has been kind of the lifeblood of a lot of painting, certainly, for a very, very long time. So
we're not starting with the Egyptians. We're starting in 1860.
well, we don't have that long, you know. And also, we're looking obviously at a very small slice of culture. It is a white Western culture that I've thought about when I've thought about this. But I particularly want us to think about Rossetti. And more than that, I want us to think about Lizzie Siddal, his muse and wife. So here she is, one of the many paintings that he made of her. He made thousands of drawings and images of her over quite a long span of time. I think about 12 years they knew each other. And they were married for 2. But we'll come back to that in a second. When you see this painting, Bill, I mean, are you immediately struck by a sense of what you think of as beauty?
Are you asking me whether I think this woman is beautiful?
It's not just do you think the woman is beautiful, but are you struck by a sense of beauty? That's slightly different, a subtle difference.
Yeah. If I say no, is that bad for our conversation?
No, not at all. It's actually completely fine, because I wonder, maybe there are the challenges of a kind of subjective sense of what we think is beautiful in another human.
I also think that partly because of what I do for a living, my concepts of beauty are not shifted a little bit, but they're a little bit more independent than they might be for some other people.
What
In
do
the
you
sense
mean?
that what I mean is that I look at people all day long. It's kind of what I do. So I kind of dissociate myself from what I'm looking at in a lot of ways when it comes to people. So it's very impersonal to me a lot of times when I'm looking at something. And if you're asking me about beauty, I would look at it in a very sort of analytical, trying to get my job done sense, rather than get sucked into it in any sort of human way.
I don't know. I mean, you have said to me before that when you frequently photograph the same models,
Sure,
and especially your friend with the most extraordinary, actually,
Kelsey's got hair like that.
yeah, copper colored hair, you have said that, she's extraordinarily beautiful.
She is, but I would find her beautiful if she wasn't my subject at that day. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, I mean, there are times, of course, that those two things overlap. In this case, they wouldn't, but you know what's interesting? I mean, this era of painting, to me, even though obviously standard Western culture, art, misogyny, BS, it's a lot of male painters that are remembered, feels like a very feminine style to me. Does that make any sense?
I think you're going to need to explain it a bit more.
If I look at a painting like this, especially sort of the Victorian era, Pre-Raphaelite feel of everything, it feels, if I didn't know that it was a man painting them, I would think it was a woman painting them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time. Like, it doesn't, they don't feel masculine in any way to me, whatever that means. I mean, that's a loaded
Whatever that
thing.
means.
Like, yeah.
I mean, I think it's right to mention for those people watching who maybe don't know very much about Rossetti. Rossetti is was the founder of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which consider themselves an elite, almost like secret society of painters who all were in attendance at the Royal Academy in London, who were sick and tired of what they felt was a prosaic way of painting that was being taught to them at the time. And they wanted to return to a kind of purism in painting that celebrates.
And it definitely feels like a throwback, this style, to me.
Well, yes, and also the sense of context in the content of the painting, the subjects of the painting. It's very much about maidens and stories, and
it's like romanticism without the mountains.
Yes, that's a really good way of putting it, actually. But the reason why I've called it beauty contest is that I wonder about beauty as a positional thing. I mean, beauty.
What do you mean?
Well, beauty has an extraordinary power in one way. So the possessor of beauty, the person who perhaps themselves is beautiful, might wield a kind of power over others. Likewise, the person who seeks to possess or in any way own the person of beauty might feel that they themselves wield a power. And in that, and I think just in real life, we probably find this, is that often, very simply, better looking people seem to get further ahead in many, many cases than those of us who are more ordinary.
Yes, absolutely true.
Yeah. So positional beauty is something where the power is wielded in a bid to elevate somebody socially, or, you know, in some way in their life and wider sort of life narrative. But the contest of beauty comes at a kind of cost. You know, the people that I've got to show you this evening, who are all considered so incredibly beautiful, have paid a very high price in one way or another for the obsessive looking their beauty has afforded them.
Yeah. It's an interesting double-edged sword, right? It's this idea that, okay, people think I'm beautiful, therefore I'm going to make my living or be known for my beauty. But then oftentimes people end up feeling, defined by their beauty, which of course they are in many ways, and feel trapped by it, right? Even though it's arguably the only way that they've been able to get as far as they've gotten in the first place. You know, it's it's this weird cyclical thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in Siddal's case, you know, she didn't come from humble origins, but she certainly didn't come from a wealthy family. She was discovered in a milliner's shop. She was working there as a shop girl. And she was famously discovered. I don't know why he went into the milliner's, or he maybe saw her through the window. But it was
interesting, though, that you use the word discover.
Right, because this is something I want to say. Gabriel, who was one of the painters of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, although lesser known, he died very young from a kidney disease. Anyway, he was passing by the window or something and he saw her, and he apparently dashed immediately to go and find Rossetti and also Millais, who happened to be painting together that day. And he burst in on them. And apparently he said, I've written it down. He said, "You fellows can't tell what a stupendously beautiful creature I have found."
Okay, that was rewritten after the fact.
Yes, I know, but
He actually bust in and said, "Hey, there's a hot girl at the shop around the corner."
Yes, but nonetheless, I have found, and again, as you point out, this idea of discovery, that beauty isn't about anything other than physical attributes that are to be coveted and owned, corralled and molded.
And that she wasn't beautiful until they came and decided she was.
And that the projection of that beauty, so there's a perception of beauty and then there's a projection of beauty as well.
Yeah.
And in that projection of beauty, again, this idea of being positional and the context of it in one's life where, you know, Lizzie Siddal came to be defined not as the very fine and unusual poet or artist she came to be in her own right, but as the muse of Rossetti, as the woman who's made famous and immortalized by Millais in Ophelia. She's the model. I mean, she posed for all of the Pre-Raphaelites, I think. And she was like the first supermodel. She would have been recognized in the street. Her face was synonymous with painting at the time. And her face came to become inextricably linked to a movement of beauty and the perception of beauty by a wider public as well. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, you know, her beauty was not by any means the beauty standard of the time. And actually she pretty much single-handedly transformed kind of social norms for beauty in the Victorian era. She was very tall. She had copper-colored hair. She had unusual, quite pointy features. She wasn't delicate and small. And actually, there's something a female journalist at the time said that red hair was described as social suicide. At first, nobody could understand why these men wanted to paint her.
There is also this, I don't know, being at that time, there's also the beginning of the, I don't know, Teutonic kind of European purity kind of thing going on, right? Mm-hmm. Which you could argue she is a good example of some strong, good genes BS kind of person as well, you don't know. You don't agree?
No, not really. I think what's interesting is if we were to see her now, if she were alive now, she does fit a kind of willowy fashion model aesthetic that we might find in the European Vogue.
Sure. But I guess what I'm saying is that I think that the definition of beauty at a time has, especially if there is a group of painters in Italy doing this kind of work, they are not redefining thing based upon 30 paintings. There is a movement in the culture that is going a certain direction.
Well, I mean,
I don't know that a single image or a single,
sort of simultaneous culture.
Yep.
You got Julia Margaret Cameron wielding her camera.
Yep.
Obviously, the birth of photography has happened.
Yeah, and she has subjects that look exactly like this.
So, yes, there was a romantic sense around this kind of hair, for example. I mean, hair is so important. I do want to say, though, the other thing about this, a lot of biographers of Siddal, half the book is about Rossetti. And up to a point, that should really piss us off.
Do you think that's because we just know more about him?
No, I tell you why it is. Very genuinely, I think that the best biographers are aware of how deeply significant Rossetti was in this woman's life. So it didn't matter that he was actually Rossetti, the painter, the poet. the fact is that the relationship she had with him was the defining relationship of her life. And she had a very delicate disposition, by all accounts. She was addicted to laudanum for a long time. She was often very sickly. She suffered dreadfully from depression. And, you know, I don't know if this makes sense, but I can imagine how incredibly exhausting and numbing it is to be repeatedly gawped at, stared at. You know, the supermodels of the 90s who were plastered on billboards and magazine covers absolutely everywhere. You know, they made a lot of money, but my goodness, it must have been tiring. What fatigue to just think.
It's always amazing to me that people want that. That there are people who seek it out, you know.
And I think, you know, anyone in that position must have to take great care not to buy into their own beauty myth too much. Mm-hmm. As you say, you know, it's a short-lived life in many ways, isn't it? I mean, the values of beauty, physical beauty, die back culturally for us with age.
On top of that, in many ways, the way you present as a model, in my experience, has as much to do with confidence in your beauty as it does your superficial self. So in some ways, if you lose that confidence in yourself, you're also degrading your value in some way, you know, when it comes to your own beauty. Yeah, it's a very tough line to tread.
I also want to say that this painting was made it was a honeymoon painting. Regina Cordium, Queen of Hearts. They had been married. She had a very hot and cold, long-term engagement with him, 10 years worth of his infidelity, her sicknesses. She did actually, I think, break it off with him for a short time. It kind of disappeared for a couple of years, really. And then she became very unwell. And her family contacted their patron, Ruskin, who got in touch with Rossetti, told him that she was sick. And by all accounts, he arrived in Hastings, where she was staying with a marriage license, said, let's get married, perhaps assuming that it would make her well again. And it did for a time. And when this painting was made, they were, I think, in Paris on their extended honeymoon, and she had become pregnant and was full of joy in her pregnancy, was delighted with the notion of having a child. And very sadly, in May of the following year, she gave birth to a stillborn daughter. And what was already a very fragile psychological state, and what was also, by all accounts, a very fragile balance of love, dependence, codependence within a marriage, just all got too much for her, and she took her own life.
How much do you think of her mental problems? It's an interesting thing. One, how much of her mental problems had to do with the way that people were treating her? We don't know, I guess, to some extent.
We can speculate, though, can't we? I mean, we could say here was a girl who was plucked from obscurity and catapulted into a kind of fame based on something that perhaps for her as a bright woman was nonetheless quite challenging. I mean, she enjoyed the pleasures of being well known and the money that brought her and her family. She did idolize Rossetti, and her beauty, of course, brought her closer to him. But again, this idea of contest, the thing that really tipped her over the edge, the stillborn daughter, you know, that's going to do it to anyone. Right. But the other thing she was aware of is that there were many instances where she knew that he was unfaithful. And she knew all the time that women, he was a charmer by all accounts. I mean, he was very engaging, handsome, came from a very kind of affluent background, was unusual as well. He was an unusual person. He was like catnip to a lot of women. And especially in that kind of bohemian emerging culture at that time, he was compelling. And she was aware all the time that she felt that women were constantly at her heels, biting at her heels, chasing her. It was a chase. And again, this idea of being exhausted. She must have been exhausted. And yeah.
But I also wonder, though, you know, with her depression and with all the other things she had going on, if she didn't have the superficial beauty, she probably wouldn't have had Rossetti or anybody else if she was that kind of like lost of a person.
What do you mean?
Like, you know, I think that sometimes I think somebody like Rossetti, I'm not saying I know Rossetti at all. I'm just saying if someone will ignore other problems with somebody if they find them beautiful, you know? So it's, you know, she may have had nobody if she didn't have her beauty, you know, so who knows? It's an interesting, yeah. I mean, maybe Rossetti was being chased too by all these women. How do we know, you know?
Well, I mean, yes, we all have our own.
Right. And he was attractive because he had talent and skill as a painter and probably a little money from all of that and fame. And so, I mean, I'm surprised no one else was trying to steal her away. That's the interesting one.
Well, I mean, she was painted by all of them.
Yeah, I know. And who knows, maybe there was some other shenanigans going on with the rest of them too.
Highly likely.
But I find the background of this thing fascinating. The X's and the O's, or I mean the hearts and the X's.
It's a very unusual painting.
Yeah, that part is the weirdest part to me. I'm like staring at the background the whole time.
It's also, I mean, I don't know if you see a painting of sadness or a painting of wistfulness. I mean, she didn't know she was going to have a stillborn child. She was on honeymoon. It was the salad days, really, for them. She's holding the flower. She's looking out at us, but it's a very lazy, languid look.
See, if she has this look when everything is going right, this woman had some stuff going on in her head. This is not the look of somebody who's happy.
Do you think it looks like she's in chains?
Oh, no, but I can see how you get there.
I just wonder with Rossetti, and again, you know, we won't know this, but...
By the way, especially with painters, I think it is very difficult because the painter could paint her any way he wants. Maybe she wasn't actually looking quite like that, but he made her look quite like that, you know?
Interestingly, there's a self-portrait she made, and, you know, we see somebody the way she saw herself.
Yeah.
Which is very different to the way all these men saw her.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself is fascinating.
Sure.
Just as something, you know,
to go in a totally different direction.
Well, I don't know if it is a totally different direction. I really don't. I don't for a second suggest that Douglas Kirkland is like Rossetti.
No, but I think Marilyn Monroe was obsessed with her own outward self. It's the one thing she had that other people wanted.
And look where it got her.
Yeah, but to be fair, there have been plenty of other people who have been wanted by everyone in the world and have not gone over the edge. So I generally wonder whether there's other things going on.
Well, I know, but I again, we're thinking about beauty. You know, I wonder, we can't know, Bill. This is the beauty of you and I talking in this way. We can only approach things and look at them together. And I would like to approach and wonder if beauty is to blame. Beauty is to blame.
For what?
For
unhappiness.
unhappiness, for loneliness, for ultimate feelings of rejection and desolation.
No, I
That
think those people would feel all those things regardless of their beauty. It's just that their beauty was one way to get there.
I think that suggests to me that you're seeing beauty as separate to the people who are beautiful.
I think it is an attribute of the people who are beautiful. I do not think it is all that the people who are beautiful are.
And this is then where I am further fascinated. Because if beauty is an attribute, it's not the expansive and all-consuming thing.
It's similar. Okay, I am relatively tall. I'm 6'1". Okay. There are all kinds of statistical analysis of people being more successful the taller they are. There's all this kind of stuff.
Oops.
So, okay, great. I got a tall gene in my thing, so that gives me this giant leg up. Does that mean that I am ultimately successful and all powerful and all these things? No, it's just one attribute of me. But I also deal with my depression. I also deal with my, insanity and my migraines and all of these other things. So, I don't think that one thing defines anyone, including extreme beauty, unless the people are of a mental state where they don't know how to define themselves. And so they sort of self-choose to define themselves, or are pushed to choose to define themselves entirely about their beauty, in which case that's a dead end that's going to lead to madness, which it does often. I don't know. He was up on like a scaffolding looking down to do these pictures.
Yeah. I mean, there's the photographs of him, but apparently she sent everyone else away when he photographed. So there's photographs of him photographing her on that kind of hoist thing on that
Gantry,
scaffold.
yeah.
But she apparently asked for Dom Perignon and sent everyone away. And the two of them were alone.
Yep.
For a long time whilst he was shooting.
That is the ultimate fantasy of every male photographer.
And when he went back the next day, she was in a totally different frame of mind.
Yeah. And he could very well have gotten that other frame of mind the night before instead.
She destroyed the majority of his photographs, and the ones she left are the ones that we see. Mm-hmm. So there were many more photos. I mean, this is quite a lengthy series anyway, but there were many more. But yeah, I think really, I mean, he did describe their encounter as sexually charged, but he was really, I mean, he was like, who was he? He wasn't a well-known, well-established photographer necessarily at the time. And yet here was this starlet, this stratospheric, pneumatic, blonde bombshell.
Right. And she was there. She was seducing him. Not sexually. Well, sexually, but not necessarily to the end of sex. But to say that she was in the position of power in this situation.
I'm going to really look at that a little bit more, though.
Okay. Because if she wasn't, when was she ever in a position of power? If not in a situation where she's alone with one assumingly straight man taking pictures where she's naked in a bed wrapped in sheets.
I mean, Marilyn's really well documented, right? And
sure.
We can see, I think it's actually really useful to have a photographer like Eve Arnold in the stable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we're looking at, again, maybe my projections onto what a female photographer would be like. But, the photographs of Marilyn, there's a different yield, obviously, depending on who it is, the Winogrand image or, the Avedon images we can see of her. These ones, though, have just got this particular quality. And much as you're saying she's wielding the power, there's something else about this, which is, though we can talk about this in a very regular way and say Marilyn Monroe was a beautiful woman, we could also say that there's something beautiful in the moment they shared.
Sure, of course.
and that in itself creates its own beauty.
But they both had to be there in order to create that moment.
Right.
Yep. I think that some of the way you're talking about this sort of removes the agency of, in this case, the women in these works.
Oh, I don't think so. Kate Moss was 17 when these photographs were made.
Right.
It was part of the shoot for Calvin Klein, the iconic Obsession photograph. I haven't put it here, of her naked on the sofa.
Yep.
It kind of destroyed their relationship. They were lovers, Mario Sorrenti and Moss, at this time.
When she was 17 years old.
And he took her to a deserted island. And he photographed her, and he photographed her, and he photographed her, and he was relentless in the photographing of her. And it was obsession. It was obsession. And she never talked about it.
I do that on a lot of my shoots too.
She spoke about it only, she spoke about it later in conversation with Mario Testino for Nick Knight, someone, Nick Knight maybe, for some, maybe like ID magazine or something. She was interviewed about this series. And in her own way, of course, and I'm only paraphrasing her, she said that it was kind of devastating to be controlled through looking, to being watched, being photographed for your beauty, somebody relentlessly at you with their camera or the paintbrush or whatever thing is the material element. But at
the same time, she's a professional model. That's kind of the job, right?
Yeah. Kind of the job. Professional model signs up to have their image made, reproduced. Professional model in these contexts, it's been recorded because some might say they're very beautiful. And I wonder if that beauty has elevated them and diminished them simultaneously.
Sure, depending on the society that it was happening in, absolutely. But that has much to do with just general misogyny than it does them specifically being models.
I'm going to finish on this one, so we'll come back to Rossetti. So Siddal died in 1862, and sometime between 1864 and 1870 he painted this, Beatrice. Now his namesake, Dante Alighieri, is the kind of oblique reference in this, because he had an unrequited love with Beatrice. And so Siddal is Beatrice or Beatrix in this painting. The greatest beauty. When Siddal died, Rossetti was struck by grief, I think, in a way that he perhaps didn't appreciate. Maybe nobody can ever appreciate grief until it strikes. But the loss of his wife made him suffer profoundly. Some people say he went insane. I don't know. And again, this is speculation. And I don't know for sure. I'm sure some eminent biographer will be able to clear this up. But it seems to me that perhaps he felt dreadfully guilty. Maybe.
Maybe he just missed her.
Maybe he did. Maybe he did just miss her. And what did he miss of her? What did he miss of her? All that beauty. Know. Anyway, before we recorded, I did tell you the macabre story, which I will mention here again, that Rossetti, by all accounts, buried her with his only copy of his poems as a kind of act of, I don't know, solidarity with the dead. I don't know, but a romantic gesture to bury his beautiful wife with the only copy of his poems. Anyway, a few years later, he changed his mind and he had his friend exhume her body. And all kinds of fantastical fictions have sprung up around this, but by all accounts, the friend, whose name I can't remember, reported back to Rossetti and anyone who would listen that when the party of exhumers went to the graveyard, they went at night and there were no lights, and so they lit a fire. And when they dug up the coffin and they opened it, she hadn't rotted. She was almost perfectly preserved. She hadn't become skeletal. And it was reported that she was as beautiful in her coffin as she had been in life. And not just that, but where she hadn't rotted away, her hair had continued to grow. And the coffin was filled with this abundance of copper, of her copper hair. Now, when I told you this story earlier, you said that's such a pre-Raphaelite romantic. Yeah. Well, yes, it is. I would say that, I mean, Rossetti actually was heavily influenced by Blake, and he was obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe.
But even in that story, we know nothing about her except her external beauty.
I know. Yet, I do want to say, people have rallied about this many times over. I mean, there are extraordinary things about this woman, this person. She was the only female contributor to an otherwise all-male exhibition on Pre-Raphaelite art in 1857, I think. She was the writer of quite extraordinary poetry. She painted, what makes up a person? In this case for Siddal, the legacy is beauty and transforming a social understanding of beauty, a cultural paradigm of beauty. But my goodness, that beauty put her in her place. And it made her suffer dreadfully.
I just question whether she would have suffered regardless.
But of course, we'll never know.
We will never know.
And I'm not sure we could ever separate it out either.
No. But plenty of people who aren't beautiful are really sad and depressed and kill themselves. So I don't know that I can necessarily blame her beauty or society's responses to that for that. But I like the story.
Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Sandi.